The rescue center had cared for many dangerous animals over the years, but everyone agreed that this cub was different from the very first day. It arrived inside a reinforced transport crate after being found alone deep in a damaged forest. Rangers had searched the area for days, hoping to find its family, but there was no sign of them. No one knew exactly what had happened. All they knew was that the young predator had somehow survived on its own. Even before the crate was opened, the cub stayed completely silent. It did not cry or growl like the others usually did. It simply watched every person standing nearby. Its sharp eyes followed every movement. That calm stare made even the most experienced workers uncomfortable. The rescue team slowly opened the door, expecting the cub to rush out in fear. Instead, it stepped out one careful pace at a time. It was much larger than a normal cub its age. Its muscles were already strong, and every step looked confident. The room became completely quiet. One trainer whispered, "This one's going to be a challenge." Over the next few days, the cub refused to follow the usual training routine. It ignored commands. It refused treats from strangers. Whenever someone tried to move too close, it pulled back and watched carefully. It never attacked without reason, but it clearly trusted no one. The instructors believed the answer was simple. They thought the cub only needed firmer training and more discipline. One experienced instructor volunteered to lead the next session. Everyone believed years of experience would be enough. The training yard was surrounded by strong safety fences. Several workers stood outside, watching every move. The instructor entered slowly, carrying a training stick and a bucket of food. At first, everything seemed peaceful. The cub stood still, keeping its eyes on every step the instructor made. The instructor gave calm commands, but the cub did not react. A few minutes later, the instructor stepped closer, hoping to guide it into position. That was the moment everything changed. The cub suddenly felt trapped. In one quick movement, it pushed forward with incredible speed. Before anyone could react, the instructor was knocked to the ground. The cub struck once with its powerful head. The impact broke the instructor's jaw. Workers immediately sounded the emergency alarm. Several rescue staff rushed toward the enclosure, while medical teams ran to help the injured instructor. Everyone expected the cub to become even more aggressive. Instead, the animal stepped backward and stood quietly again. At that exact moment, one of the quiet caretakers arrived after hearing the alarm. The caretaker had never been part of the training team. Daily work mostly involved preparing food, cleaning enclosures, and sitting near frightened animals without asking anything from them. The gate opened carefully. Everyone shouted warnings, telling the caretaker to stay back. But the caretaker kept walking slowly, speaking in a soft voice that no one else could hear. The cub looked up. For several long seconds, neither one moved. Then something happened that no one could explain. The giant cub calmly walked across the yard, lowered its body beside the caretaker, and gently rested its head before climbing into the caretaker's lap as if they had known each other forever. No growling, no fear, no anger, only complete peace. Every person standing outside the fence forgot to speak. Even the emergency teams stopped moving for a moment. The same cub that had injured the most experienced instructor only minutes earlier now looked like an ordinary young animal searching for comfort. No one understood why, and that mystery was only beginning. The rescue center remained unusually quiet after the accident. The injured instructor was taken to the hospital, where doctors confirmed that the broken jaw would heal, but it would take time. The staff felt relieved that the injuries were not life-threatening, yet no one could stop thinking about what had happened. The biggest question was not why the cub had attacked. The biggest question was why it had become so calm the moment the quiet caretaker entered the enclosure. The center's director ordered a full review of the security cameras. Every minute of the training session was watched again and again. As the staff carefully studied the recordings, they noticed details they had missed before. The cub had shown several warning signs before reacting. It had lowered its ears, stepped backward, and tried to create space. It was not looking for a fight. It was trying to avoid one. When the instructor continued moving closer, the cub finally reacted out of fear instead of anger. That discovery changed the way many people looked at the young animal. The quiet caretaker was given permission to spend time with the cub each day. There would be no training sticks, no loud commands, and no pressure. The only goal was to let the cub feel safe. Each morning, the caretaker entered the enclosure carrying fresh food and clean water. Sometimes the cub walked over immediately. Other times it watched from a distance. There were no attempts to force trust. Days slowly turned into weeks. Little by little, the cub started waiting near the gate before the caretaker arrived. It accepted food from gentle hands and even allowed its thick fur to be brushed. The workers watched from outside, amazed by the peaceful scenes. One afternoon, the caretaker sat quietly on a large rock after cleaning the enclosure. Without making a sound, the cub walked over and rested beside them. It closed its eyes and relaxed completely. No one had ever seen the animal look so comfortable. The rescue center's animal behavior team began taking careful notes. They noticed something unusual. The cub seemed to understand body language better than simple commands. It reacted to calm voices, slow movements, and patient behavior. It could even tell when someone was nervous before they spoke. Some workers believed the cub was simply intelligent. Others believed it remembered everything that had happened before it was rescued. Not everyone agreed with the new approach. A few trainers warned that becoming too close to a wild predator could become dangerous later. They respected the caretaker's success, but feared that trust could disappear without warning. The caretaker listened politely, but continued the same peaceful routine every day. As time passed, the cub began following the caretaker around the enclosure like a loyal shadow. It stayed nearby during feeding, cleaning, and health checks. Whenever strangers entered, it quietly moved between them and the caretaker, not in anger, but as if standing guard. Then, strange things started happening after sunset. Night security officers reported hearing movement outside the main fences. Motion sensors activated several times, yet every patrol found nothing. Fresh footprints appeared near the outer fence, but they did not belong to any animal living inside the center. The staff first believed it was a wild animal passing through. But on the third night, the footprints appeared again. This time, they surrounded the cub's enclosure. Someone, or something, had been watching the rescue center from the darkness. The strange footprints around the rescue center quickly became the main topic of every staff meeting. Security cameras were checked every morning, but they showed nothing except moving trees and shadows. Even so, someone or something kept coming close to the fences during the night. The director asked wildlife experts to study the tracks. After comparing them with old records, they reached an unexpected conclusion. The prints belonged to the same rare predator family as the cub. That discovery shocked everyone. The experts explained that very few animals from this bloodline had ever been seen. They were known for their sharp instincts, high intelligence, and strong family bonds. Years ago, people believed they had almost disappeared from the wild. The quiet caretaker listened carefully while the experts spoke. If one family member is alive, one expert said, others may still be out there. No one knew whether the animals outside were searching for the cub or simply passing through. Either possibility made the rescue center even more careful. The staff doubled the night patrols and checked every gate before sunset. For several peaceful nights, nothing happened. Then one evening, just after the lights were turned off, the cub suddenly stood up from its sleeping area. It lifted its head and stared toward the outer fence. The caretaker noticed the change immediately. The cub was not afraid. It was listening. A few seconds later, the emergency alarm echoed across the entire rescue center. Motion sensors had detected movement near the storage building. Security officers rushed outside with flashlights while the caretaker stayed close to the cub. The young predator remained unusually calm, but its eyes never left the darkness beyond the fence. Suddenly, voices were heard near one of the service gates. Unknown people had entered the property without permission. The staff quickly contacted local authorities while security workers carefully moved toward the area. The situation was tense, but everyone stayed focused. Before anyone reached the gate, the cub let out one loud warning call. The sound echoed across the entire center. The unexpected noise caused the people near the fence to panic. They immediately turned around and ran back into the darkness before security could reach them. Within minutes, the area was secure again. The next morning, investigators searched the ground outside the fence. They found signs that someone had been watching the rescue center for several days. There were footprints, food wrappers, and marks showing that people had waited there for hours. No one knew exactly why they had come. The director decided not to take any chances. Additional cameras were installed, and local wildlife officers promised to increase patrols around the area. News about the unusual rescue center soon spread across the region. Reporters began asking questions about the rare cub that had become so famous after the training accident. Not long after that, officials from wildlife organizations arrived to inspect the animal and review its future. Some believed the cub should remain under human care for its own safety. Others believed it belonged in the wild, where it could live as nature intended. The quiet caretaker said very little during the meetings. Instead, they sat beside the cub one evening as the sun slowly disappeared behind the trees. The cub rested peacefully with its head against the caretaker's leg, completely unaware that people were making decisions that could change both of their lives forever. The following week, the rescue center became busier than ever. Wildlife experts, veterinarians, and conservation officers visited almost every day. They wanted to understand whether the cub was ready for a life in the wild or if it should remain at the center for its own safety. Every visitor noticed the same thing. The cub stayed alert around strangers, but became completely relaxed whenever the quiet caretaker was nearby. It was clear that the bond between them was built on trust, not fear. To help make the final decision, the experts organized several natural behavior tests. These were not training sessions with commands. Instead, they were simple challenges that allowed the cub to show its instincts. The first test involved finding hidden food inside a large wooded enclosure. The cub searched carefully, using its nose and sharp senses. It found every hidden meal without becoming frustrated or aggressive. The second test checked how it reacted to unfamiliar sounds and moving objects. The cub stayed calm, watched carefully, and chose safe paths instead of rushing toward danger. The final test was the most important. The gate to a larger protected area was opened for a short time. The cub was free to explore without anyone calling it back. Everyone watched in silence. The cub walked through the open gate and disappeared among the trees. Several long minutes passed. Some people wondered if it would ever return. Then leaves began to move. The cub stepped back into view, carrying nothing except a small fallen branch between its teeth. It calmly walked to the caretaker and dropped the branch at their feet before sitting down. The expert smiled. The cub had explored on its own, remained calm, and returned by choice instead of fear. That afternoon, the instructor who had been injured months earlier visited the rescue center for the first time since recovering. The scar on the jaw was still visible, but there was no anger in the instructor's face. After watching the cub quietly resting beside the caretaker, the instructor spoke to the group. "I believed strength came from control," the instructor admitted. "I was wrong. This animal wasn't trying to challenge us. It was trying to protect itself." The room became silent. Those simple words changed the discussion. Instead of asking how to control the cub, everyone began asking how to respect its natural behavior while keeping both animals and people safe. The rescue center officially changed some of its training methods. Future rescued animals would be given more time to build trust before any lessons began. The cub had taught everyone something valuable. A few days later, the final decision arrived. The cub would be released into a large protected wildlife reserve where it could live freely while being quietly monitored by conservation teams. The news brought mixed emotions. The staff celebrated because the cub had earned its freedom. At the same time, saying goodbye felt much harder than anyone expected. On the morning of the release, the caretaker opened the transport gate inside the reserve. The cub stepped on a grass, lifted its head, and breathed in the fresh forest air. For a moment, it looked toward the endless trees. Then it slowly walked forward until it disappeared into the forest. The caretaker smiled through watery eyes, believing the farewell was over. But only a minute later, branches moved again. The cub came running back one last time. The caretaker barely had time to wipe away a tear before the cub came running back through the tall grass. Instead of disappearing into the forest, it stopped only a few steps away. For a moment, the two simply looked at each other in complete silence. Then the cub slowly walked closer. Just like it had done on the day everyone thought it was too dangerous to trust, it gently lowered its head and leaned against the caretaker. A second later, it settled beside them and rested its head across their lap. The wildlife officers, veterinarians, and rescue workers watched quietly. No one wanted to interrupt the moment. Months earlier, the same young predator had frightened an entire rescue center after breaking an instructor's jaw during a training session. Now, it was showing something completely different. It was showing trust. The caretaker softly rubbed behind the cub's ears, just as they had done every morning inside the rescue center. The cub closed its eyes for a few peaceful seconds, then stood up on its own. It looked toward the forest, then back one last time. Without making a sound, it turned and disappeared between the trees. This time, it did not come back. The caretaker smiled, even though saying goodbye was difficult. Deep inside, they knew this was the ending they had always hoped for. The cub did not belong behind fences. It belonged in the wild. Life at the rescue center slowly returned to normal, but the story of the unusual cub stayed with everyone. The injured instructor fully recovered and became one of the strongest supporters of patient, respectful animal care. New staff members were taught that every rescued animal carries its own past, and understanding that past is just as important as medical treatment. The rescue center also introduced new training methods based on observation, calm behavior, and trust. The changes helped many frightened animals adjust more comfortably to human care before returning to nature. As the seasons changed, wildlife rangers working inside the protected reserve occasionally reported seeing a large, healthy predator moving through the forests. It always kept a respectful distance from people. It hunted well, avoided unnecessary conflict, and appeared to be thriving in its natural home. Sometimes the rangers noticed something interesting. Whenever they passed a certain quiet trail, the animal would appear for only a few seconds. It never came too close. It simply watched from the edge of the trees before quietly disappearing again. Almost a year after the release, the caretaker returned to the reserve to visit the area. There were no expectations, no plans, just a peaceful walk through the forest where the cub had begun its new life. As the sun started setting, the caretaker reached a small, open field. A gentle breeze moved through the trees. Then, from the shadows, a familiar figure stepped into view. The cub was no longer a cub. It had grown into a powerful adult, strong and confident. Its eyes carried the same calm expression as before. For several quiet moments, neither one moved. There was no need. Some bonds do not need words. The grown predator gave one final look, turned toward the forest, and disappeared into the fading light. The caretaker never saw it again. But every visit to the rescue center reminded people of the lesson that one remarkable animal had taught them. Real trust cannot be forced. It is earned through patience, kindness, and respect. And sometimes, even the wildest heart remembers the person who first made it feel safe.